right. Welcome to Historical Happy Hour, the podcast that explores new and exciting historical fiction novels. I'm your host, Jane Healy, and in today's episode, we welcome Avery Cunningham to discuss her amazing debut novel, The Mayor of Maxwell Street, which Publishers Weekly calls a striking debut that perfectly captures the contours of Jazz Age Chicago and the varying experiences of its citizens of color. Readers will be eager to see what Cunningham does next. Welcome, Avery. Thank you so much for coming on. This is
Of course.
awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here and excited to talk with you and everyone who's joining us live. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, and I should also mention Avery's book comes out a week from today. And for many of you who are longtime listeners, you know that pre-orders are huge for authors. So please consider pre-ordering her book. I'm going to do a brief intro bio and then jump into questions about Avery. Avery Cunningham is a resident of Memphis, Tennessee, and a graduate of DePaul University's Master of Arts Writing and Publishing program. She grew up surrounded by exceptional African Americans who strive to uplift their communities while also maintaining a tenuous hold on prosperity in a starkly segregated environment. She aspires to tell the stories of complex characters fighting for the right to exist at the fringes of history. When not writing, Avery's adventuring with her Bernese mountain dog, Grizzly, and wading waist deep in research. Welcome and tell us about the premise for the Mayor of Maxwell Street and how you came up with the idea for this really fascinating novel.
Yes, of course. Well, to give, I suppose, a brief synopsis, The Mayor of Maxwell Street is about our main character, Nellie Sawyer, who is the daughter of a very wealthy African American man in 1920s America, 1920s Chicago. And her aspiration is to be an investigative journalist. And while she's in Chicago, she ends up getting this assignment to find the elusive Mayor of Maxwell Street, who's the supposed leader of a really powerful crime syndicate. And she recruits Jay Shorey, who is a biracial black man who's come out of the South and kind of reinvented himself in Chicago as a speakeasy proprietor. And she recruits him to try to help her find this elusive individual. And along the way, they face all of the different issues that come within the Black elite of the time, the gangsters, the dangers of Prohibition-era Chicago. So it's a really great exploration of the Black elite of the time. It has all the things that we love about the 1920s. It's lots of glitz, lots of glamour, a lot of fast cars, but also it's a really great exploration of race relations in the city at the time and the kind of choices that people are forced to make in pursuit of an American dream that is not always created for everyone. Um, and your question about where the inspiration came from, the inspiration is
Yeah.
a bit multifaceted. The initial inspiration, the really first spark, came in the 2020s. Actually, there was a lot of really great media coming out where there was a lot of great representation. To use a kind of common example, Bridgerton, for example, where you have this period of history, Regency era in England that everyone really loves to watch media about, but then they diversified the cast. And while
I
I
love
really
that show.
appreciated, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And while I really appreciated this representation, I was excited for it. I love to see it. I was a little bit frustrated, I should say, because what I really wanted was to see a narrative where, especially the elite and high profile societies of Black and Brown communities was represented as the primary narrative. I became a little bit frustrated at slotting individuals into a society or a social group that took very serious measures to never have diversity or representation within their
Right.
societies or
Right.
groups. And so I wanted to do more research. I wanted to find out, what does the history of the Black elite really look like in this country. I wanted to learn more about that side of our American history. And that was kind of the initial spark of the story I wanted to tell, an exploration of this new side of what the Black experience was. The secondary inspiration was, of course, the 1920s, when this idea first came to me at the start of 2020. That was the time where everyone was wondering, well, is the 2020s, is that going to mirror the 1920s? There were a lot of think pieces of comparing the two decades, and like everyone else, I was rereading The Great Gatsby at the time, and I noticed a kind of parallel. How the story of The Great Gatsby is really about the the illusion of the American dream, how much you'll have to sacrifice, the choices you have to make to be accepted into a certain group of people. And I really thought that experience mirrored a lot of the Black experience very well. And also at the time, I had stumbled upon these really interesting literary theories brought about by a lot of African American scholars that Jay Gatsby could actually be read as a Black man passing for white, depending on your individual interpretation of the novel. And I loved that interpretation. It really changed my entire view of what The Great Gatsby could be talking about if viewed through that lens. And the two ideas really did meld together. I think I initially wanted to do a more straightforward Gatsby retelling, but as I went through the drafting process and the research, the Mayor of Maxwell Street really became much more than a Gatsby retelling. It became about the Great Migration, about the diversity within Chicago, the corruption within Chicago, and really what this era in American history looked like for all Americans, but most especially African Americans and Americans with diverse backgrounds.
Excellent. So it's such a fascinating premise, and the Gatsby question is one of my questions later on. I never heard the theory that he was a black man passing as white, but when you think about it now, I have to like go back and read the book again because I mean, it's certainly plausible. Yeah, I love that. And so you have the characters are really well drawn in this story, and let's start by talking about Nellie, who's the protagonist. You know, talk about the development. She's you know, racially, economically straddling two worlds. She's trying to pursue a career in journalism. And how did you come up with Nellie as the main character?
Yeah, so I what I really wanted was a character, like you said, who could straddle both worlds. I wanted someone who was an outsider in both areas, and I think that came from a particular line from The Great Gatsby, that I was simultaneously within and without,
Mm,
repelled and I think fascinated by the variety of life. And I wanted a character that could really represent that. With Nellie Sawyer, even though she comes from this incredible wealth, this unprecedented wealth as a young Black woman, she is also new wealth, very nouveau riche. And as she and her family realize, that's not always accepted within, circles of the Black elite, where it's more
mhm.
about your legacy, your prestige, how long you've existed in this position, a society that's very kind of suspicious of newcomers and outsiders. So she's not easily accepted into that community, but she also, has aspirations of, as you said, becoming a journalist and doing all of this great good. And she's not very much accepted there because she's also a Black woman, and she is prone to viewing different situations not only from a place of righteousness, as in every young person who wants to do good does, but also from a place of privilege, and that skews a lot of her understanding of the world around her. So I really wanted a character who could kind of stand at a distance from both worlds and kind of discover how each reflects each other, mirrors each other, but how each could change in their own individual ways. And also, I will say she was inspired in part by a friend of mine. Her name's Rachel Hinton. She was the youngest chief political reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times when she
Oh,
started, I
amazing.
believe, back in maybe 2018, 2019. And she's also a young Black woman, a dear friend of mine. And I was just blown away by her skill and her knowledge and her expertise as a journalist. And this character is in part an homage to the strides that my dear friend made. So part of that is an inspiration to her.
Oh, I love that. How does she feel about this? That's amazing.
I think I admit I was about halfway through the book when I told her, it's like, hey, don't panic, but you're kind of the inspiration for my main
Oh,
character.
so sweet. That's
But
amazing.
she's been my inspiration for many years, and I'm just so very proud of her. So I wanted to present a character who embodied that identity of being not only a journalist, but a Black journalist and a Black female journalist in an industry that, especially at this time, was very reluctant to view Black women in any
Yes.
kind of sphere outside of a really formatted box. And I think Nellie is a character, she gives a really great window into both of these worlds. She's apart from it, but she's also thrust headfirst into it. So we can experience all the highs, all the lows, all the danger, all the excitement as she does with new and
Mhm.
fresh eyes. But she's also capable and competent enough to understand what she's seeing, and give a lot of insight and perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so interesting. Another character that I loved was, is it Sequoia? Am I pronouncing it correctly? Uh,
Yes, exactly.
yes, I wanted to make sure. She's a member of Chicago's upper class who takes Nellie under her wing, introduces her to the right people, and she has like the most amazing fashion and some of the
Mhm.
best dialogue in the book, in my opinion. And how did you come up with her? I was thinking of Janelle Monáe, frankly, like the whole time. I was like, that's who I thought of when I was reading it. How did you come up with her as a character?
Yeah, no, Sequoia is definitely a fan favorite. She was wonderful to write and to observe her journey throughout the story. And what I wanted for her was to one be a kind of guide and an introduction for specifically the world of the Black elite for Nellie, but I also wanted to present someone who was not fully a part of that world. As readers find out with Sequoia, she's always talking about. You mentioned her great fashion. Most of her fashion is something that she's borrowed. It's something that she's won. It's something that she's bartered for. And she's a representation of how not everyone can be fully a part of the inner circle, that appearances are so very important, and the moment that you drop that appearance, you step out of line, you're an outsider again.
Hmm.
And Sequoia is really great representation of that, so I thought that she would be a great kind of guide and window for Nellie into this new society that she's entering into, but she also has enough presence of mind to criticize that society.
Yes.
So in a way that connection between her and Nellie can feel more genuine because they both can see the flaws, but Sequoia is more that you need to accept the flaws, work with them, not against them, in order to get to
Hmm.
where you want to be. So that's kind of where the inspiration for Sequoia came from. And as I said, as I went through the process of writing her, she became such a strong character, and more than the stereotypical quintessential best friend character that you see a lot of times in novels and media, but more of a more subtle criticism of
Hmm.
the world that Nellie was try to enter into.
Yeah, I like that. She was not, just a yes woman. Like, she definitely
Mhm.
like pushed back and gave it right back to Nelly. And I liked that dynamic for sure.
Yes.
Um, I love learning about lesser known parts of history, and I found like the time period and the characters and the setting so fascinating because I didn't know much about upper class Black society in 1921 in Chicago, and so talk about your research. What were some of your most impactful and interesting sources for the story?
Yeah, definitely. And there are some key, I suppose, left over from my time in graduate school, primary sources that I really leaned on when doing the research for this novel. And the first one has got to be The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. For those who aren't familiar, The Warmth of Other Suns is a pretty much complete as can be accounting of the Great Migration in this country, where Black Americans were moving out of the South and pursuing what they thought would be better, more prosperous, safer opportunities in other parts of the country. And her accounting of that period in history is just so thorough, and the narratives are so personal that it made this time very intimate and very present. And her research I tried to work into so many different aspects of the novel, and it really, I feel, breathed a new life into my understanding of this era outside of what I learned in school, what I learned from my parents, what I learned from my family. um, so she was an incredible primary source, and if anyone hasn't already, I highly recommend reading the book or listening to the audio book, which is narrated by Robin Miles. It's a really wonderful education. Another great source was Our Kind of People by the late Otis Lawrence Graham, and it is again, as complete as can be, exploration and accounting of the history of the Black elite in this country, talking about the key cities where the Black elite kind of thrive and prosper, our traditions, our culture, our societies and institutions, our practices, and the past, but also how the Black elite has tried to form and change and adapt to be more prepared for the future. And that was another incredible source. And for me, even as a Black woman who grew up in a relatively prominent upper middle class Black community, so much of this was unknown to me. So it was a great way to become more connected with my own history. It also is a great reflection of different periods in American history and how this really small insular community has tried to adapt and change to survive all of the oppression that surrounds the Black experience in general in this country. And then the original Black Elite by Dowling Taylor was another great exploration. She focuses more on a specific era of the Black elite, and that's from maybe 1860s to early 1900s, so kind of the Reconstruction era, and specifically in DC. And just another great accounting of this history. The individuals who built the society, who determined the fashion, who determined the institutions, who made these incredible strides in government and policies and entrepreneurship. And that was another really, really prominent source. And then I have to shout out a couple of other books. Ira Burkhow's Survival in the Bazaar is an accounting with very personal narratives about Maxwell Street and the Maxwell Street market, which becomes a bit of a central setting for the book. Anything Goes, which is a really great and fun history of the 1920s and the fashion, the politics, the technological advancements. So those were really my some of my best primary sources, and those are books that I recommend to everyone, even if you're not a history buff, even if you're not researching the 1920s. They're just a really great way to learn more about our world and our culture and our history.
Yeah, that's excellent. I will put those in the show notes when we put out the podcast too, because I love hearing about people's sources, and those are all I think worth exploring. Um, I want to get to the love story or love triangle and aspect of the story. This book is getting a lot of buzz. You know, we have a lot of historical fiction fans. I think was it is it like a most anticipated on Goodreads? Did I see? Um, is that
Yes,
yeah?
it's on a most anticipated 2024 Goodreads list. So
So
for those who
great.
are on Goodreads, thank you.
Yeah,
I have
so,
no
so
idea how
great.
that happened.
Yeah, that's so and, so, you know, I've been reading, like, what people are saying on Goodreads and different places, and so it's often you know, thought of as a love triangle between Nellie and Jay Shorey, who you mentioned, who's kind of this manages a speakeasy, mysterious figure, connections to kind of Chicago's underworld, and Tomas, who's this incredibly wealthy European with royal blood. And so when you were writing it, did you think of it as this love story, love triangle, or did you think of it more as Nellie's story, or a little bit of both?
I think the best answer would be a little bit of both. It's certainly not a romance. It's a love story in a sense that these are all young people who are feeling seen and understood for the first time. And that can create a lot of feelings very similar to love. All of these characters, Thomas, Nellie, Jay, they're all individuals that even though they've always been surrounded by people, surrounded by a sense of community, they're still isolated. They're still ignored or looked over or underestimated, and each of them in turn sees the other and acknowledges their potential and their expertise. One of the reasons that Nellie is so drawn to Jay is that he takes her seriously. He questions her and confronts her and challenges her, but he believes in her, and that's something that she's not accustomed to. And then the same goes for Jay. He sees in Nellie someone who has all of the ambition and determination that he's been criticized for his entire life. And with Thomas, he's someone who has been born into this really great wealth and privilege. He's Spanish American, Spanish Mexican, and connected to aristocracy, but he also has this history of colorism and racism in his own background. So they're all characters who do connect with each other, but I don't want people to go into it thinking that it's a traditional romance. It is a love story, but it's not so much a happy ending. These characters do discover along the way that that connection and simply acknowledging and seeing and recognizing each other may not be enough to overcome some of the barriers that are in their way. So I did envision this always as Nellie's story, but I did want her. I admit, as a Black woman, we're so often depicted with partners or relationships who don't represent the best of us. And what I wanted Nellie to face is this um, decision between two individuals who do deeply care about her, but also two individuals that bring a lot to the table and are really caring and supportive, and especially with Toma. I wanted her options to seem good, or at least one of them too. I won't spoil anything, but as
No,
readers
no spoilers,
discover
but
along the way.
yeah, but I like the way it ended up. I won't oh, that's all I'll say. Um,
Okay.
so I of course when I before I do these interviews, I go down like Google rabbit holes and stuff. So the book is called The Mayor of Maxwell Street. And so how does the actual history of Maxwell Street, which I looked up, and the Maxwell Street Market, which also plays a role in the story, how does that impact the narrative?
Right. So much of Maxwell Street and what I wanted, what I'd hoped to accomplish is to make Maxwell Street more of a character in the story. But Chicago is such a broad city with so many different communities and neighborhoods. I wasn't able to give Maxwell Street what I felt was the full run of the story. Would have been 1,000 pages long, and it's already long enough. But the Maxwell Street, it represents the story in more thematic ways, or incorporated into the story in more thematic ways. So many individuals who study Maxwell Street or who were a part of that community going back, 100 years, talk about how diverse Maxwell Street was and how if you were able to participate in commerce, then you could have any opportunities that you'd like. That it really, at the end of the day, didn't fully matter, if you were Black or Eastern European or Jewish. If you had something to sell, then you had a place on Maxwell Street in the Maxwell Street Market. And I think that a lot of our characters kind of represent that determination and that willingness to make a place for themselves in the wider community. But also, the thing about Maxwell Street is that it's this great pocket of diversity and, in a way, equality in the midst of one of the most segregated cities in America. So that kind of really mimics what our characters are going through. They're trying to carve out a place for themselves in these institutions and these systems that are incredibly segregated, and with systemic issues that enforce certain caste systems, certain places for them. So Maxwell Street becomes really a theme in the novel of individuals who have the will and the capability and the competency, but are forced to make a make all those changes and make all those strides, surrounded by these incredibly oppressive barriers.
Yeah, actually, and that leads me to my next question. One of the things that was interesting is, there were scenes of upper class social events, the nightlife on Maxwell Street Market, where they were very diverse, blacks and whites mingling, but often you did a good job kind of showing the underlying tension in those scenes sometimes between different groups. So talk to me about what segregation looked like in Chicago in the 1920s, and to give people some context for this story. You've talked about it a little bit already, obviously, but if you want to go into a little more detail.
Yeah, of course. Segregation in Chicago, it was incredibly stark, and I think it's easy for people to forget that or not recognize that because they may see Chicago as, this really great progressive beacon of a city. But in truth, the type of segregation that you see in Chicago was incredibly subtle, was incredible, but still very much enforced. The South Side of Bronzeville, and even in some circles, it's kind of a derogatory term now, but in some circles, it was called the Black Belt of Chicago, was where a lot of Black Americans congregated, especially in the midst of the Great Migration, when you had hundreds of thousands of people flooding into the city. And another great source that I didn't mention, it's a document called The Negro in Chicago, and it's I think, 1,000-page report commissioned by the city of Chicago after the violence of the 1919 race riots, where the city wanted to get to the bottom of, okay, what is the Black condition in Chicago? How did we get to the point where we had a race riot in our city? And that document really does demonstrate how subversive some of the segregation practices were. Talking to bank lenders who were
Mm.
telling, reporters and telling city officials that they simply did not want to lend to Black Americans. They based on these stereotypes that had really no backing, and how that enforced a lot of the redlining that kept Black Americans in a certain part of the city. But there's also some moments of violence, such as, especially in the Hyde Park area, when Black Americans started to move into Hyde Park, there were threats, there
Mhm.
were, um, um, how to say, gatherings that criticized the Black Americans moving into the neighborhood. There were even bombings occasionally of homes. So the city did try to segregate itself. And then, of course, the different neighborhoods of different ethnicities. You visit the Greek Delta in Chicago. They visit the Polish Pinch in Chicago. Italian Americans are kind of quarantined in a specific area. So again, it's not the type of segregation that you might see or expect to see in places like the South, the Deep South, like Alabama or Georgia. But it was very much enforced and very much present, where these ethnic lines were not crossed. And when they were, as with the 1919 race riots, you see kind of this explosive confrontation and violence.
Fascinating. Um, Thank you for that. I have another question now, and this one's kind of a two-part question. This is one of those stories when I was reading it, I felt very cinematic, like you write in a very cinematic way. And I'm just wondering, we were talking about agents. Do you have any movie interest yet, or anything you can talk about?
Nothing I can talk about. My greatest hope and dream is that this project could have a series adaptation. I think it would make a wonderful miniseries, but
Mm-hmm.
that though right now those are all just hopes and dreams.
Right, right.
Nothing that I can announce right now.
Do you have anyone in mind who would play Nellie or Jay or
Oh
Tama?
wow. Oh wow. Oh wow. I do. Danae Benton, who a lot of people, especially historical fiction fans, may know from The Gilded Age on HBO. And if you're a musical theater fan, she was also a lead in the original Broadway cast of Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812.
Yes. Oh,
And
yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. And she's a marvelous actor, of course, a beautiful singing voice. But when I was writing Nellie, she was the person I envisioned the entire time. If you go to the Pinterest board that's public and that I made
Uh,
for the book, she's all over there
oh, she'd
because
be
I think
excellent.
she would, and I think she just represents the character perfectly. So if I had to do an ideal casting for um, Nellie Sawyer, would be Danae Benton. Now, Jay is a little bit more difficult because my ideal casting for Jay, he he's an actor who has aged from the person that I would cast him as. To be specific, his name is Mark Taylor. If you were a Disney Channel fan growing up as I was, then you might recognize him from the movie 17 Again with Tia and Tamara Lowry. And young Mark Taylor would be an exceptional Jay.
Okay.
So if you could just move time and space around,
There you
I think
go.
we could put together a really ideal cast. And then I for Toma, there's also a specific actor that I've had in mind. And I only just discovered him recently when I watched the movie Babylon, and he plays one of the lead characters in that movie. And I won't mis try to attempt his name and mispronounce it, but if you look up the main cast of Babylon, he's the kind of titular character. And with Thinking of Tama, he fits the image and the description of that character perfectly. But I only just really learned of his existence a few months ago, and
Okay.
traditionally a Mexican actor. So this was, I think, Babylon was his first experience in an English language film. Um, so again, if you could just move around time and space,
There you
I
go.
swear I could put
Yeah.
together the most ideal casting.
Well, you never know. Well, keep us all posted because I think it would make a great series as well.
Oh,
Um,
thank you. I hope so.
the next questions I ask all are all more writing based and not specific to your story, and I ask them on every podcast. And then, if after I ask these questions, as everyone who's been on the podcast and webinar before know, put questions in the chat or in the Q and I will ask them of Avery. So, how did you strike a balance between fact and fiction in your storytelling? And were there any strict rules you adhered to?
So that's an interesting question, and that's, I think, the great triumph and the great struggle of historical fiction is to tell a convincing historical narrative, but also, adhere to the storytelling aspects that are important in fiction. And I think when I tried to strike that balance, it really came down to making sure I filled out the world as much as possible. I'm a theater kid at heart, so when setting up a scene, I think of it very much like a set. What are the characters hearing? What are they smelling? What are they touching and feeling? What are they seeing? And I tried to make sure that all of those elements were reflective and accurate to the time period. And I think by filling in the set, it allowed the characters who fit into more fictional tropes to experiment a little bit more, to be a little bit more creative, and to step a little bit out of that realm of the exact historical accuracy and kind of be themselves as characters because the set really filled that in for them. You might compare it to, like, say, a production of Macbeth set in like 1960s Russia or something like that, where the world around the characters is very specific to a time period, but the characters themselves could adapt to any time period because of the issues that they're going through. So that's one of the ways where I really try to capture a balance, was making sure the world was as vibrant as fleshed out as possible. But also, as I'm sure you know, and any historical fiction writer will tell you, it's impossible to have perfect historical accuracy on top of a compelling fictional story.
Yes.
So we try our best to walk that line, but I think each author and each reader decides for themselves which aspect is more important to them when it comes to how much they enjoy a story. And so for me, I try to be as close to the middle as possible, but telling a compelling story, I feel like always is more important in fiction, even than absolute historical accuracy.
Yes, absolutely. I feel the same. But it is a hard balance. I said this to you before we came on. I can't believe this is your debut because it's so beautifully written and
Oh,
it's
thank you.
really a sweeping story, over 500 pages long. What was your writing process like? Like how do you write? Are you a plotter or are you a pantser? Like, do you write by the seat of your pants or do you plot things out or a little bit of both? I love hearing
Yeah,
about people's process.
no, of course, of course. Well, when I was younger, I was most certainly a pantser. I was someone who believed in the muse, and that if I just had a general idea, I can just sit down and it would all come to me, and a beautiful narrative will present itself on page without any kind of planning whatsoever. And I learned very quickly, especially as I took on more professional roles and became associated with more professional writing spaces, that for me at least, pantsing is not the most efficient use of my time. So I definitely became a plotter. I outlined as much as I could this entire story, pretty much chapter by chapter, before I began actually drafting. Now, of course, some chapters were moved, some chapters had to be X'd out or changed a little bit. So some of the minutia of the story did change, but the overall narrative did stay very much in line with that original outline. So I think I wouldn't have been able to tell such a sweeping story if I hadn't taken the time to plot it out first. And also, I will say, in full transparency, this is a novel that I sold on proposal, which I didn't realize was an option until
Wow.
until it happened to me.
That's
Um,
amazing.
Thank you, thank you. It was a great experience. So that meant I had a deadline. So I essentially had to plot it out. I had to know where I was going, how I was going to get there, and how long it would take me to get there in order to, have a completed and satisfactory work by the end of the process. And that was very stressful for me. I'm someone in the past, I took 4 years working on my last manuscript, which is still only about 75% done. So working on that kind of a deadline for this type of story was a bit strenuous, but it also was cathartic in a way. It
Mhm,
forced me to really sit down and give my full attention to the story and these characters and the work that it required. And I'm grateful for that experience because now it has proven to me that I can still match that same energy, that I can do this in the future, that I don't have to feel like I need 4 or 5 years to write a
mhm.
book. That I can kind of lean on my education and my experience a little bit more. Um, so that was a huge benefit, but also a bit of a barrier for me personally as well. But I think it turned out pretty well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a big fan of deadlines. I feel like you use the time you have. I feel like especially with research and all everything, like I'd be doing that for years if someone didn't
Right.
tell me I have to turn something in by a certain date. So
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. um, so this is your debut, and it's officially out 1 week from today. How does
Mhm.
it feel? And is there anything that has surprised you about this whole experience from like handing in the draft to now?
Oh, wow. It's been a whirlwind experience,
I'm
and
sure.
the truth is I don't think anyone can ever truly prepare you for what it means to be a debut author. It's so specific to each person's experience, specific to your publisher, specific to the book, specific to the month and week and day that
Mhm.
your book
Yep.
is coming out. So it's an experience that you can prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for, but I think nothing can really prepare you for the intricacies of what it means to be a debut author. But it's been a wonderful experience, and I really owe a lot to my publishing team. I went to grad school and undergrad to be a writer, and I have these wonderful professors. And what everybody tells you in your school classes and your workshops and your writers groups is that it's going to be difficult with your publishers. Your editor's going to have ulterior motives. They're not going to tell you what's going on. The book you submit is not going to be the book that's finally printed, and all these kind of
Yep.
warnings that you really take into these meetings, that you think, okay, I'm really going to stand up for myself and really advocate for my own book. But in truth, my publishers at Hyperion Avenue have been nothing but supportive and enthusiastic, and they champion this book at every opportunity. And if not for their willingness to collaborate with me and support me and make sure this novel reached its audience to the best of its ability, I think my debut experience would have been entirely different. So I do truly owe a lot to them and their support and just how marvelous of a team they are. I also have to shout out our 2024 debut group.
Oh,
um,
nice.
it's yes, it's a great group, and for those who aren't familiar, most debut groups, if they can, form a kind of chat group where we can all support each other, encourage each other, vent to each other, and after going through this past year with that kind of support system, I can't imagine what it'd been like to go through it alone without that type of support system of other authors going through the similar thing. And of course, also to shout out my family. Every author, I think, has their own individual situation of what their family life is like, what their work life is like. And I think without my family constantly reminding me that this is what I'm supposed to be doing, that this energy and this time that I'm putting towards becoming a published author is worthwhile, that this debut year is going to be an exceptional year, I think I would have become discouraged or disheartened at different points in the experience. But I think making sure you have different support systems, at home in your everyday life, but also support system other authors is really important. Um, because
I
otherwise, you can really stress yourself out.
I completely agree. Yeah, and that's excellent. I'm glad you've had such a positive experience with your editorial team too. I think that's huge. We have aspiring authors, writers in the audience. What is the best advice you can give them about writing and getting published?
Excuse me.
No, no.
I the best advice is the advice that we all get, and it may sound like a broken record, but this year or the past 2 years has proven it to be, the truly the standard. Just keep writing.
Yeah.
To tell a bit of a personal anecdote, about 5 or so years ago, I was working full time and dedicating a lot of time and energy to my full time work, and I had a conversation with myself and I said, you're really not putting a lot of time into your writing and your energy into your writing. If you're not published by 30, then, you need to commit yourself to something else and really put that energy and that drive into some other form of work so you can essentially get on to your life, so to speak. And so I doubled down. I stayed writing consistently. I tried to practice and improve my craft constantly. I took on every opportunity to write, whether that be ghost writing or editing or working with other authors. And I think that consistency and that determination really did carry me through this moment, because if I had stopped 5 or 4 years ago, I wouldn't have had the opportunities that led to me becoming a debut author. And I turned 31 exactly a week after my launch. So we're right on schedule. Um, and so that's the biggest piece of advice I can give. Every writing instructor, and author, and professor, and mentor that you meet will tell you, the only way to become a writer is to write. And I
Yes.
think that is the truth for all of us. Even if it's just a couple words a day, even if it's only a couple words a week, the key to becoming a professional published author is to stay consistently writing and to follow
Mhm.
through with the process and know that if you continue to put in the time and the effort, that you will reach your ultimate goal and you will reach your audience.
Yes, I always say that publishing is persistence. You got to stay in the
Right.
game. Yeah, and keep working at it. Excellent. Okay, so we have some questions from the audience, and then we'll
Okay.
talk about how to stay in touch with you. One of them, I was one of my questions from Denise. I love the cover, as do I. Talk to me about the cover, and did you have much input into the gorgeous design?
Yeah, so the cover is gorgeous. I absolutely love it. It's drop dead iconic. The designer, if anyone's interested in looking her up, is Amanda Hudson. She's an award-winning cover designer, has created some truly beautiful work, and so I'm honored to have her creative and brilliant hands, be a part of this entire process of producing the book.
Oh, can you hold up the
Oh,
book?
and
Do you
so
have it? Because
yes, yes.
I only have it on NetGalley. So
Oh,
yes. Sorry, I
There
meant
we
to
go.
thank you, Carolyn. I should have said that from the start. Isn't it beautiful, the color palette? I love it. That whole vibe. Yeah,
It's very
very nice.
gorgeous. It's very gorgeous. Um, I was trying to think if I can hold it up, but I'll put it down for now, and I'll hold it back up a little bit later. So yes, Amanda Hudson was behind the cover, and Face Out Studio was the studio behind the cover,
Oh, yeah, they're
and
great.
they're absolutely wonderful. I
Yeah.
loved, even though I wasn't able to work with them directly, they my publisher really trusted Amanda and knew that her work and her creativity would shine through. So they pretty much just let her loose on the project. And this is the cover she came back with, and it was absolutely gorgeous and
Nailed
an
it.
A
Yeah.
plus right off the bat.
Right,
Um,
right.
and what I really love about the cover is some of the subtleties of it. I'll hold it back up again. One of my concerns, and I think this was just me having very specific dreams about what I wanted my cover to be. I didn't think it represented the time or the place very well. I had, these thoughts of like a photograph with, a scene of the Chicago skyline in the 20s, something like that. And it took a friend of mine, Ashton Lattimore. She's another debut author. She has a incredible book called All We Were Promised coming out in April. And it took her insight to really show me how subtle the details were of this book. Um, the jewel tones really do represent and capture thematically the wealth of the main character and kind of the
Yes.
luxuriousness you can expect in the novel.
Mhm.
Subtle hints to the Chicago skyline. So, where if you're familiar with Chicago, you can kind of see the elements incorporated there. And of course, the entire Art Deco vibe with the border here.
Yes. Yep.
And really, what they prioritize and what I'm personally grateful for is making sure that a Black woman is front and center. This was always a priority. There was never an attempt to hide the fact that this novel was viewed through her perspective, that she is the primary force that drives the entire book. And so this beautiful model, who I actually connected with on social media, and
Oh,
I'm great
cool.
friends with her now, having her be the central focus of the entire novel, I think does capture the essence of what the story is truly about, outside of the setting or the time period or the aesthetic or anything like that. So yeah, it's a fantastic cover, and my deepest hope is that in future books I can have Amanda Hudson work with me again because she does incredible work.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, and there's lots of, people say in the comments saying what a beautiful cover it is. And someone's asking, will there be signed copies available anywhere that they could order probably? And do you have a book tour lined up?
Yes, so to address the first question, you can order signed and personalized copies from Novel Bookstore. It's a bookstore, an indie bookstore based here in Memphis, Tennessee. And they're doing an exclusive pre order campaign for signed and personalized copies. And I think they're
Nice.
going to just be doing those through the rest of the week. So if you would like to go ahead and order your own, or order for someone a signed personalized copy, please just look up Novel Bookstore and you can type in Novel Bookstore Avery Cunningham. Or if you go to my social media, then I have a link that'll take you directly to the site where you can pre-order your book, and then they'll have it signed and personalized by me and sent out within a couple of days of the actual launch on January 30th. And then in terms of a book tour, I do have a lot of locations where I'll be visiting. We'll be adding to those throughout the year, but I can definitely go ahead and announce that I will be in Chicago, Illinois on February 22nd, speaking at my alma mater, DePaul University. It's an
Nice.
event free and open to the public. So if you're in Chicago, in the Chicago area, if you'd like to come down and talk about the book, hear more about the book, it'll be an exciting event. And of course, I should say, if anyone's local here in Memphis, Tennessee, we're having the official launch celebration on January 30th, featuring Tara Stringfellow, who's another incredible historical fiction author. And then we'll be in the Nashville area March 23rd through March 24th, and then we'll be in Atlanta in April, and we'll be in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, excuse me, in March. And so we're adding to these dates as we go. For those who are interested in seeing where I'll be throughout the summer and throughout the rest of the year, just be sure to follow my social media. I'm sure we'll be sharing handles and all of that a little bit later, but I try to stay up to date and announce, all of my different locations, a good couple of months in advance.
You're gonna be busy. That's exciting. That's
Right.
great.
Thank you. I'm glad to be busy. Oh, it's a good busy.
Busy is good. Yeah. Oh, Cheryl Hagman asked, is there a hardback edition? So do you have trade paperback and hardcover, or is it just coming out in a hardcover?
There will be trade paperback and hardcover. The trade
Okay.
paperback is what you'll mostly probably be seeing in stores, but you can still order the hardback, which is what I have right here. You can still order that through all of the retailers. You can order this through Barnes and Noble, through Amazon, through your local indie stores as well. Penguin Random House site, of course. So if you do want a hardcover, and I highly recommend it because it's gorgeous and shiny and has this
Yep.
pretty red
Book
here.
jacket. Yep.
Yes, yeah. So if you do prefer a hardcover, then there are ways to get a hold of it. But of course, a trade paperback will definitely be available everywhere books are sold.
Awesome. Mary Worthington has commented in the comments in the Q&A. She wants to tell you that she's a longtime Memphian and she can't wait to see you at Novel Bookstore in Memphis. Bravo to you and congratulations. She's been
Oh,
such sweet notes in both places, so I have to make sure I give a shout out.
no,
And
thank you. Well, hi. Well, just
thank
love to see
you,
Memphis people in
Mary.
here.
And there's people from all over. If you see the comments, it's really great. And Canada, Maryland, California, LA, and some of our longtime webinar attendees, which is awesome. Thank you, everyone. One more question before we go. What's the best way for readers to stay in touch with you? And do you Zoom with book clubs? So I guess that's two questions, but two in one.
Yeah. So I'll start with the book club question. I am more than willing to Zoom or do virtual meetings with book clubs if you're a book club that's close to Memphis. So by that I mean driving distance within 1 or 2 hours. I'd be more than happy to travel and meet with you all in person. I know I'm meeting with a book club in Atlanta in June, and I'm meeting with a book club in Nashville in March. So that's just kind of an example of the places that I'd be happy to travel and the distance I'd be happy to travel to meet with a book club. But then of course I'd be more than happy to meet with you all virtually. It would be an honor to talk with those who've read the book and are interested in discussing. And in terms of how to get in touch with me, I am most active on Instagram. You can follow me at Avery Writes Big Books there. I also have that same handle on TikTok where I do a lot of great videos about the history featured in the Mayor of Maxwell Street. I am also on Twitter or X or whatever iteration you prefer to use.
Whatever it is called. Yeah.
Exactly at AA underscore Cunningham. And then I'm also on Facebook at Avery Cunningham author. But I'm most active on Instagram. So if that's, the place where you'd like to get the most information about upcoming tour dates or the book or just fun pictures of my dog doing really beautiful and gorgeous things, then that's a great place to start.
Excellent. Avery, this was lovely. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm very excited for your debut and I will try to get this recording out a week from today on your launch day. Congratulations again, and I'm so excited for all the buzz it's getting too. I mean, it's just so nice to see when debuts are supported the way yours is being supported, and I can't wait to see what it does. And so I just want to remind everyone to sign up for the next couple. We have all the registrations for upcoming historical happy hours are on my website. Next month is our third anniversary historical happy hour, and I'm having Kristen Hanna on, New York Times bestseller Kristen Hanna, with her latest release, The Women. So please register for that. And if you could like and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. This is all the marketing stuff I have to say at the end. That would be tremendously helpful. Also on YouTube, if you like, or subscribe. And thank you again for everyone for their support. Congratulations, Avery. I'm so happy for you. Have a great week, everyone.
Yes, you all too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Take
Take care,
care.
everyone.
Bye bye.